Okay, good morning. Again, Erev Shabbos. We are doing today Tesvav Amud Beis. We're starting out the last few lines on Tesvav Amud Aleph. The Mishnah told us that Gamliel said, "Kishem shemaiseh ma'aseh behema, kach karbana meichel behema." The same way her actions were ma'aseh behema, so too we make her carbon a meichel behema. So the Gemara now explains. From Gamliel Emer, Kishem says the Gemara Tanya. We learned in Amar Lahem Gamliel Chachamim. Gamliel said to the Chachamim, the assembled rabbis, Seifrim, Hanichu Liva Adrashena. Seifrim is his appellation for the Chachamim, which is a very interesting lashon. It's not like you find this in any other place. You do find that the term Seifrim is used. Um, Ezra has Sefer as an example. But we don't find that the Chacham are called Seifrim. He calls them Seifrim, Gamliel. He says, "Anichuli va'adrashana." He says, "Leave it with me, and I'm going to explain it." You know what it's like? Kimin chaymer, some sort of thing that they put on the neck. Rashi says it was made of gold. We turn the page now to Tesvav Vase. What? Why is he saying that he's giving his own drasha? So the Gemara explains the Shammai Rab Meir. The Ka'amar hi achilas ma'adan. What the Gemara saw in test. The Rameh was saying she was feeding him such delicious delicacies. Lafika karbana ma'achal behema. So because she was feeding such nice stuff, we want to show the midah keneged midah. Therefore, we make her carbon a ma'achal behema. So Amarle. So Rabbi Gamliel is saying, as a result of hearing what Rameir said, Hatena chashira. That makes sense for a rich woman. She was feeding the guy Madane Olam. Aniya ma'ikol man. What would you say for a poor woman? What would she be feeding the guy? She's not giving the guy fancy things. So what's the like? Aha! She fed the guy really, cheap food. So therefore, give him Michael Bama. Pasha. Obviously, uh, if she's giving somebody very cheap food and she's getting Michael Bama, it's like it's not there's no comeuppance. It's only going to work for a wealthy woman. Therefore, says Rabbi Gamliel, "Al kishem shemaiseh ma'aseh behema kakarbona meichel behema." So therefore, Rabbi Gamliel says, you want to know something that's going to apply both to rich women and to poor women? It's not a vart in what she fed him in the substance shabai. The substance shabai would depend on how wealthy the woman was, but the maisim are the same. The maisim are ma'aseh behema, so therefore the carbon is the carbon of a behema. So a couple of things to note over here. Number one is, as we noted already, that it's called Seifrim, which is not the typical way to refer to the Chachamim. So the Yavits in the back want to suggest, and Yaakov Emda wanted to suggest, you know why he's calling Seifrim? So it's talking about Rameir. Rameir was a lablar. Rameir was a Sefer. Remember, I mentioned when we were having the end of your Dalid, we darshan Kosnais Ur. So I mentioned to you that the Medrash Rabbah writes, the Teirasa Sharabi Meir Kosov Kosnais Ur with an Aleph, not an Ayin. And so I said I can't get into that now, but I'll talk now just a second about it. Meir was a Sefer. He had his own Sefer Torah. It was once a time, the Gemara tells us, and Gittin that Rameir was away, and they didn't have a Megillah to read from. So Meir wrote it from memory. And they read the Megillah from what he wrote from memory. Right? So he was both obviously fantastic, endowed with a fantastic mind, but also he was a Sefer. He was a Lablar. So that could be, Ramil is not referring to him directly, but he's saying Tanachacham Sefer. But he's really going after Rameir, and Rameir was a Sefer. And that's why we use such a peculiar Lashon you don't find in Shas to be used about the Chacham. That was number one. All right, the Gemara Kedushin Lamo talks about the rabbis were also called Seifrim over there. Second, as the Maratchias points out, Rabbi Gamliel, that's what we're talking about here. Rabbi Gamliel, you know when he lived? Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi. right? We have two Rabbi Gamliels. We have Rabbi Gamliel number one, Rabbi Gamliel number two. But either way, Rabbi Gamliel is long before. He's long before. He's long before Rameir. Rameir is a student of Rabbi Akiva. Rameir is a student of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva. This is the time of when we find the whole debate between Gamliel and Rabbi Shua. So Rabbi Meir would be, possible, I guess, to be alive in the same way that Rabbi Shimon Chai is alive. Remember this story in the Gemara Brachos Kavches, but he's not sure that this would be the right Rabbi Gamliel because he lived at the time more of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Maybe he was very young. Don't know. All right. So now we're at the Mishnah. I just wanted to point out before we go to the Mishnah that look at Rashi and the bottom Rashi right before the Mishnah. That I want to have the same diak over here that we had before. What did it mean, says Rashi, that Maiseh or Maiseh Behema, Kach Karbona Meichel Behema? What does Rashi say? What is the Maiseh that Maiseh Behema? Shehifkir Atzma Latashmish Lamisha Ina Ben Zuga. Right? She was mafkir herself for Tashmish to somebody who wasn't her husband. Was she? We don't know. We don't know. Why is Rashi again? Remember what I said in the Mishnah? If you go back to the Mishnah for a second, you look at the Mishnah back on your Daled. I said also look at Rashi. Rashi says that this woman is over Ritzona, right? We said if in Kachal Chasatar al over Ritzona, Kalvachemer al Oise Ritzona. So what is over Ritzona? Rashi says in Zinsa over Ritzona. And I said to you then, like I don't understand. Why are we so focused on the issue of actually being Mizana? The issue should be the fact that she was cloistered. The fact that she had a stira, they tumah with somebody, that isn't that alone enough of an avera? The fact that we keep on focusing on this, and you see here again what Rashi's saying, that's not the issue. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. The point is that she had a stira done. That's alone the Maisa Behema. And I made the argument that could be there's a bit of a dig here from Rashi, which we will get back to it later on to prove that in fact this woman who doesn't go through all the way has really become a big tzaddikas, the fact that she held herself back in the moment of truth, which means then that the one who's bad is the one who's actually all the way mafka herself to tashmish. Just the stira alone and not going all the way when there was the time, that actually is not an ever signer. Yes, initially, but she's a huge Baal Shuba. She's a big tzaddikas. That's why maybe Rashi's not focusing on her. Perhaps. All right, continues the Mishnah. So the next stage in the process of getting her to drink was they would bring her an earthenware kli, and they would put in there a chatzi lugmayim from the kiyah. Rav Huda and Ravias. Rav Huda says it was less of a shear, it was a Ravias. And the Mishnah now, the narrator in the Mishnah, right, Yehuda Nasi, he's now giving you a clue to remember this. We haven't seen that yet in terms of the Ksav, but for our purposes now, we'll just take it as in fact that he's also going to say that when it comes to the parsha of writing down the Megillah Sotah, he holds that you don't have to write as much as the other mandamar. In other words, he says you could write less than the Rabbanan. So too by the Mayim, he holds you could do less for water than the Rabbanan. You don't have to put in a chatzilog, you put in just the revius. Fine. Nichnas lehechal, when they come into the hechal, upanal yamina, then it turns to the right. Umakim haya sham, amma al amma. Right, so he comes into the hechal, it turns to the right, and there was a place there in the hechal. I don't have my picture today. I should have brought it. But if you remember, when you walked into the Heichal, right, you remember everything is, here's the Kaisel, right? Here's the Aron Kodesh, here's the Kodesh Kodashim. You're coming from the Mishkan, from the Mishkan this way. So you come in, not the way we have it with the Kaisel, we think we go in this way. No, you come in from here. So as he came in, so the first part of it is that's Nashar and all that stuff, it's not the Kodesh. Anyone can go there, even people who are Tameh is fine. And that's why part of the question is, well, as Manasek, if you go up, there's definitely parts of the basic mixture were not an issue. The question is, do we know them? Can we identify them? So the whole Harabais is not us. The whole Harabais Most of it, I shouldn't say most, a significant amount of it is totally fine. Right? The question is, do we know which parts? Now you might think, well, obviously the closest to the Kaisel in those areas, that will be clearly the problem. That's true. Should be obvious. But since we don't know 1,000%, so you'll say we shouldn't go. I said, well, because we have a pretty good idea of where it would be, then by definition, the Kaisel is the Kaisel for the retaining wall for the Beis HaMikdash. It's for sure the retaining wall for the Beis HaMikdash that was built by Herod when they put together the Har Bayis in a beautiful way and they expanded it. So then we can figure out from there exactly where everything was. Maybe. So in the course of this conversation, right, we see that as you're coming in from this Nashim, you're walking into the Heichal. So when you come into the Heichal, make a right turn. Make a right turn. Right? So in other words, what direction are you going in? Right? If that's west and that's east, right? You're going in what? That would be north, or that's south. Right? So you're going in a southerly direction. Good? You're making a right turn. Right? If this is east and you're making a right, you're going south. Is that right? Am I right? I think so. Good? All right. Finish the Mishnah. Umakim hayasham amalam. There was a place there on the floor that was like a small size. The tavla shel shayish. There was some sort of uh, marble tablet there. The tabas haysa kavuaba, and there was a ring on it. Shehu magbia, that you would use the ring to lift it up. V'noitzel afar mitachtea, and you would take the ground from underneath. This is not like the Gemara there in Yuma and Dalid, where the Gemara says, "Oh, they noticed something that was off about one of the tablets on the floor," and they said, "Oh, that's the place where the Aaron is thing." That's and boom, they died. So this was a different place, obviously. They used this place whenever they had to start the situation. So what would they do? They would pick it up. They would take the ring, right? You needed how else would you get your hands into the floor of the mikdash and picking up this tablet of marble would be hard to do. They had a ring on it that would enable you to pick it up like a pothole cover, right? Pothole covers have the rings on it to be able to pick them up. So the same kind of thing. You would pick it up, and what happened when you picked it up? So once you have that up, and offer me tachta, you would take earth from the mikdash, the nice and kadesh yir alamayim. You put it inside this cup that has the water, so it should be seen on the water. What's the source? What's the scriptural source to tell you that you're required to do this? Because the pasuk said, "Uminha afar asher yiyeh bekarka mishkan." You have to take the dirt that's from the mishkan. You can't just take regular dirt. You got to take special dirt. And so the Kohen would take it. So Rashi explains over here that the Mishnah is very focused that the earth has to be placed into the cup. It has to be seen on the water. Says the Rashi. It has to be. You have to be able to see the dirt by the water. Well, why is that? V'nasan alamayim. It doesn't say just put the earth in the water. It says v'nasan el hamayim. We learn out from that mashma shlayeh nivla b'seichel. We're not looking for like zaltzvas. It's like you can't. Let's say that's how much soil you put in, right? But you want to be able to have a situation where you're able to see the earth, and not that it's totally swallowed up and it wouldn't be obvious. Okay, so you might ask, how is there going to be a ring with a tablet and like how much earth did they have in there? Like, how many Sotas did have to go through? Would there eventually be like a pothole? It'll eventually go down. If you're taking a lot of earth, a lot of Sotas, I don't know. Okay, so yeah. So Zot the Gemara. The Gemara tells us as follows: Tana pile shel cheres chadasha. The type of earthenware kli that had to be used for the water that was given to the Sotah, the Mei Sotah, had to be cheres chadasha, had to be a new kli. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Says the Gemara, my time of Rabbi Shmuel. Why does Rabbi Shmuel require a new kli? So he says, Gomer kli mitzayra. We learn out the Xerashav of kli from mitzayra. Ma'alahalan cheres chadasha, afkan cheres chadasha. Just like my mitzayra, the kli that's required is a new kli. So to over here, the kli is also required to be a new kli by Sotah. Says the Gemara, really? V'hasam minalan. How do we know that the that the what do you call that the kli that was required is required to be new. Dechsev v'shachas hatzipor achas al kli chares al mayim chayim. Ma mayim chayim shloi nasa b'melacha af kli shloi nasa b'melacha. So what do we mean like this? Right, mayim chayim is fresh, is like fresh water, like running water, not water that's been hanging around. So there's a special requirement by a Metzayra that when he sechs his bird, he does it al kli chares al mayim chayim. So just like mayim chayim has to be like this fresh running water that was never used, it was never had a lien, it never was used for any work or anything like that. So we see the comparison in the pasuk between the kli chares and the mayim chayim. So since they're put together, the juxtaposed al kli chares al mayim chayim, since the mayim chayim has never been used before, so af kli shloi nasa bar malacha. Sotah requires a new kli by the Mitzayra. Now, since we're learning our kli from Mitzayra, that means that the site is also going to require a new kli. Right? The pasuk by the site is v'lakach hakahein mayim kedoshim bichli charest umina afar sheya b'karka mishkan yikach hakeim v'nasan al hamoyim. So you see the idea that it says a kli by Sotah, and it says a kli by Mitzayra. So that gives you the gzeira shava of kli to require a new one, right? So you get the jumps. We go a new kli is required by Sotah because the new kli is required by Mitzayra. How do we know new kli is required by Mitzayra? Because by Mitzayra requires mayim chayim, which would be new water. Which, if that's a requirement by Mitzayra to have new water. And we're learning out from the new water, a new kli by Mitzayra. So since we have exertion of kli from Mitzayra to Sotah, so also a Sotah requires a new kli. That's the basics according to Rabbi Yishmael. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Why are you stopping on just a new kli? Imala halon mayim chayim, afkan mayim chayim. Right? Just like you require nice, fresh, good running water by the Mitzayra, so why don't you require that by the Sotah as well? Why is it only the new kli that you're learning out? Learn out also the requirement of mayim chayim. Says the Gemara. Now, obviously, it's clear in the pasuk that doesn't say mayim chayim. Right? It says mayim chayim clearly by Mitzayra. Right? It says in the pasuk shachas hatzipor ha'achas al kli chares al mayim chayim. But by the Sotah, it didn't say that. By the Sotah, it just said v'lakach hakayin mayim kedoshim bichli chares. Mina afar doesn't say about mayim chayim. So on that, the Gemara says the Rabbi Yishmael hachanami. No, Rabbi Yishmael says correct. Yeah, mayim chayim is required by the Sotah. What do you mean that mayim chayim is required by the Sotah? Where are you getting mayim chayim from? You're just taking water from the kiyar. What's the mayim chayim? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says may kiyar, the water from the kiyar. Where did the water from the kiyar come? Rabbi Yishmael Aimer may ma'ayan hein. Rabbi Yishmael says it was a spring. Right? If you remember that there was a spring in the Beis HaMikdash, it was called Ein Eitam. The Gemara Yuma says about Ein Eitam on Lamed Aleph. The Gemara says that it was a certain high, and that was the Amas Hamayim that would feed all the different mikvahs in there that the Kohen had to go to do the mikvah. And care. How did it have the water? How was it always? It was fed by the spring. Could very well be that was the spring that fed the kiyar as well. According to Rabbi Yishmael, there was a kiyar that had water from a spring. So by definition, when you're taking the water from the kiyar, it is mayim chayim water. It is the nice water that just came from the spring. The Gemara in Yuma gets into detail about this. The Gemara explains there that the kiyar had a sort of a can be puzzled by Lina. They had a way of putting the kiyar into a pool and lowering it out, raising it. All this not for the moment, but it was meimayan fundamentally, and therefore anything taken from it was effectively mayim chayim, and therefore, in fact, there's no issue of challenging Rabbi Yishmael and saying, "Oh, well, if you hold a new kli, then you should hold mayim chayim." I do. Yeah. Continues the Gemara. The Chachamim aimer mishar meimaisen. The Chacham say it come from other waters. Now here you have to look at Rashi. Beautiful Rashi explains. Mishar meimaisen im ratzol litem belatoichai mei mikvah yitain. Rashi explains it. If they wanted to put in mei mikvah into the kiyar, that would have been okay. Not that they did. In other words, most likely the key of water was generally going to be the May of Mayan. But in theory, if you wanted to put in May Mikveh, that was okay. Yeah. So again, according to Rabbi Shmuel, we end up over here by basically saying that it should be a situation we have a Kli Cheres that's new. You have Mayim Chayim. That is a requirement according to Rabbi Shmuel. Says the Gemara. I can ask another question. Ikal Mifrach. So I'll ask you another question on Rabbi Shmuel. The fact is that there's a requirement of the red string, right? The cedar wood. These are requirements by the Mitzvah, and they are not requirements by the Sotah. So if I'm learning out from Mitzvah, they require nuclear. I'm learning from Mitzvah, they're requiring Mayim Chayim. Well, why not learn out that you require 8 Zeres Ve'ez L'Vishni Teilas? So that's Rashi explains. You should ask Malam Mitzvah Shekain Ton. But figure Klisha Loich Chodesh. Maybe that's why he gets a new Kli. Time of Sotah She'ein Ba'ela Kolelu. Sotah doesn't have 8 Zeres Ve'ez L'Vishni Teilas. Maybe it shouldn't get a Kli Chadasha. So the Gemara wants to upshlag Rabbi Shmuel and say you're not taking it all the way. You're not learning it all the way, this kli all the way through. Fine. Now we have a new limud. So Rabbah tells us the following. Amar Rabbah. Rabbah adds. Amar Kra. The pasuk told us that what did he say by Sotah? V'lokach hakayin mayim kedoshim bichli charis. He has to put an earthenware kli. Says the Gemara. Amar Rabbah Amar Kra b'chli charis. Klisha amarti l'chakvar. Again, Rashi beautifully tells us, what could the pasuk have said? The pasuk could have said, "V'lokach kli cheres v'nosam b'mayim." It could have said, "Take a kli cheres and put in some water." What does the pasuk actually say? V'lokach hakayhein mayim kedoshim bichli cheres. The kohen's going to take the mayim kedoshim bichli cheres. What do you mean bichli cheres? Which kli? Sounds like we know about this kli already. Says Rabbah, yeah. It's already the kli I told you about before. By Metzora, it requires this new earthenware kli. You can use that kli here by Sotah. You hear the word? According to Rabbah, you could use an old kli. That's not the issue. And the word of how I know it is scriptural. Because it's a weird lashon. He takes it with the kli charetz. Which kli charetz are we talking about? We didn't mention a kli charetz yet. Says Rabbah, it's the kli charetz that you mentioned back in Vayikra, by the Metzora. Meaning, you can use an old kli. Here's the Gemara. Amar Rabbah, lo yishana adloi shaloi nis achmu panav. Avol nis achmu panav psulin. Rabbah says, on Rabbah's point that you could use an old kli, no problem, but you can't use an old kli that's very black, that got dirty, right? You notice the word nisachmu. Where did we have it last time? Right, we had it in Brachas Vav. Right, if somebody wants to see shadim, right, what should he do? He should take a black cat, uchmasa bas uchmasa, right, buchrasa bas buchrasa, and he should take the placenta of this black cat, the daughter of a black cat, the oldest black cat of the daughter of the oldest black cat, and he should grade it up. Remember the whole mice over there. Uchmasa is the dark. Right. Rabbi Zera was called dark because his legs were burned when he was testing himself out to see his kedusha. Yeah. So So says the Gemara. If there's using now an older kli, so you have a risk. What's the risk? It's going to get dirty. So the Rebbe says if it's too black, you can't use it. Right? Says the Gemara, my timer. What's the reason that he says you can't use a dirty kli cheres? Just like the water. Just like the water hasn't changed. The water is, clean. It may not be mayim chayim, as Rashi notes. It's not. And we're not saying it's mayim chayim. Meaning, most likely it is, because even according to the Chacham, the water in the kir is generally mayim chayim, unless they want to change it for some specific reason. But nevertheless, that's not the source. The source is that nothing has been done to this water. It's a mayim kedoshim, but of course, you just take it out of the kir, and nothing's been done to the water. So too, you shouldn't use a kli that's been become dirty and gross. That's not appropriate. Meaning, say her ma'isa behema. and therefore using a klicheres, and therefore using a carbon of sa'irim and all this, yes, but dirt, disgusting, that's not what we do in the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, Bay Rav and so Rav now makes this point about not using a dirty kli. So now Rav says, Bay Rav and what happens if you take a dirty kli and then you bring it back to the kivshana eish and you re-burn it, whatever, tidy it up, and now it's clean. What about that? Are you allowed to use it? Mi amrina and kevin de idchu. Do we say that once it was already pushed away, it became no longer kosher because it was dirty? It's remained forever no longer kosher. I don't kevin either. Once I returned it back to its pristine state, then it's okay to be used. For example, the Gemara tells us, Taisa brings down, in Taisa of Nisa'achmu, Taisa brings down about big day kahuna. Right? If they're ripped or whatever, like they're not kosher for that avodah, but if you fix them, then it's okay. So maybe we say something similar over here. The more tries to bring a raya. Says the more Tashma, we have a limud there. Blessed said that a person who was a mitzvah, if he takes the eitz eres v'shin telas, shehifshil bahen kupasel achar, he puts it on a basket on his back. He's carrying it with him to the Beis Hamikdash or wherever it is. Sulin. It's puzzle. You can't use this eitz eres v'shin telas anymore. Why? Says the Marva, some hadre umashati. Says the Marva, when you took it off your back, it all became back to its regular state. So you see a proof that what? That once something changed its state, even the idchi, you can't use it again. So it's a proof that you will never be able to use these kalim again. Says the Marva, it's not a proof. Awesome, the ikleif iklufe. It could be that what happened over here was that when he put it on his back and was carrying it, that some of it came off, so it wasn't exactly in its pristine state anymore, and therefore it wasn't kosher. Not because it's not hadar, not because it's not hadar. It can't go back to its regular state. But if it could, then maybe it'll be fine. So by the situation of the eitz eres, the eitz of shintai loss, it can't go back to its regular state because you took off a piece. That's why it's not kosher anymore. But the earthenware kli, once you put it back in the fire, it could go back to its original state. So that's what that'll be fine. That's the Gemara until here. So the Mishnah said when he came into the Beis Hamikdash, remember he came in right from east to west. He walks in. Rashi had said in the first Rashi, Haya maybe Rashi said Hakayin. So this is the Kayin shop, right? So the Kayin comes in, and he walked into the Heichal, and then he made a right turn. What was the right turn for? It was to go to the Amal Amma to pick up the ring on the tablet, get some earth. So the Gemara focuses on this notion that right, he had this earthenware kli, has a little bit of water in there from the kiyar. However much he had. He comes into the heichal, and he turns to the right. Right? Why do you have to have the kiyar outside the heichal? Because the heichal is kodesh. Right? So you have to come in already, washing it up before that. So the Gemara now is focused on this idea that you're going to the right. Specifically on the right. They put this tablet on the floor on the right. Now, you might say, well, maybe they did it because that's where the tablet was. No. The Gemara is darshaning up on the point, either they could, maybe we're saying that they could have chosen to put the tablet on the left, and they chose to put it on the right. So now the question is, well, why did they choose to put it on the right? What's the emphasis on the right? The Gemara is called Pina Sha'ata Pina La'yu Derkin. It's a famous line in Yuma that comes up a number of times, that whenever you turn, you should always turn to the right. There's something about the right that there's a benefit over the left. So whenever you make a turn, you turn to the right. That is how they did in terms of the Avodah, and that's what you did here. You came into the Beis Hamikdash, make the right turn. So if here's east, that's west. Right? So here's north, and that's south. So you make a turn to the south. So I figured we'll conclude the day with the Be'er Sheva. The Be'er Sheva, in his commentary on Sotah, doesn't have much to say on the I got to take a Mars of the first part, but he has much to say on the not I got to take a Mars here. And this one is a fun one. Says the Be'er Sheva, Kol Pina Sha'ata Pina. Yan Sharaisi Kimikarev Amduk Tas Anoshim. Says now I've seen recently some people get up, Machzikim Atzim Chacham Gedolim Bein, and they say themselves they're really smart people, big Tamil Chachamim. Shechayev Adam L'Shmaya Lehem Afilu Emer Al Yamin Shu Smell. That's a joke, right? Right? Kol Pina Sha'ata Pina. Right? You have to do El Derech Yamin. It says these are such Chacham that think they like the Sanhedrin. What does it say by this one? Nafilu al yamin shu small. Small shu yamin. Right. So we're talking about yamin. Yeah, you have to do all the turns derech yamin. So you have to listen to them, even if they say the left is the right is the left. Just because that's what they're just saying over here. What are these chacham saying? They said v'imtziu milibam. They're pushing out the following idea. Now, what does it mean? Kol pina shata parna leyu el derech yamin. It means the hainu mitzad yamin. They start out on the right and they turn to the left. Right? When we're starting, think about it from our perspective. Imagine our perspective that we're, and the example that he uses is that when you think about our writing, right? Everyone else writing left to right, right? We write right to left, yeah. In Hebrew, right? We're writing right to left, yeah. So he says, "Kol pina shata pina." You should do it derech yamin. According to these chacham be'eneim, according to this new generation of smart people who are saying foolishness, says instead of starting on the left and going to the right, they're starting on the right and going to the left. Okay, and he says, and they want to change a lot of things with this idea. What do they want to change? They want to change the nanum by lulav. They want to change hadlakas neris on Chanukah. Says absolutely not. He says, what do we do? Right, minig Ashkenaz. Forget the Kabbalist, but minig Ashkenaz. What's minig Ashkenaz? You take the Arba Minim, right, and you first shake it to your front. Right, what's the front? If the shoulder you're diving is to the east, right? So you're going first to the east. Then what do? You turn to the right. So which direction are you in now? The south, right? Then you turn again to the next direction. Which direction are you in now? You're in the west. Right? And then you turn again which direction? You're in the north. You're doing called Pina Sha'ata Paina. That is a source from this Gemara in Yuma, which here we have here inside also, called Pina Sha'ata Paina, Lo Yu El Derech Yamin. So he says these guys are doing it the opposite. Because this is a practical ramification of their idea that it means you started on the right and go to the left and go to the left. So he says what they're doing, them and their Talmidim, Hegilu Atzman v'Talmidim Mishubashim Imam L'Nanei Lulav Mizrach. They're starting out right Mizrach, but instead of going to the right, they're going to the left. So instead of going south, they're going north, and then they're going west, and then they're going south. So he says this is 100%. This is wrong. By Ner Chanukah, they're starting on the right, going to the left. Right, the other shita, they're Beishamah. So he says this is not correct. Means you start out on the left and you turn to the right. So we'll get to Yuma. You'll see how that plays itself out. But for all practical intents and purposes, it means this sukkahs. Make sure that you don't find yourself turning this way. Always got to be turning that way. Stop here. Have a good shabbos.